Hello, all. I'm Harmless Canadian, and I'm here to once again talk about Crimson Desert. The discourse seems to have slowed just a little, and I once again find myself somewhere in the middle on just about everything. But I think there are some particulars that are worth talking about right now. Primarily, I want to talk about the success of the game, the patches that have been released since launch, and how, while they've been lauded as a game changer by some, they merely improve on what makes the game good and do little to change what makes the game great. Crimson Desert launched to mixed reviews and strong but not exceptional Steam numbers. There was a real divide in players, and at the time it appeared to be along lines that didn't quite fit the standard gamers versus media story. I said as much in this video here, but I will admit that while I don't fully divest of that idea, I do suspect that some of the aspects that lowered review scores or general impressions for gamers were a little more superficial and actually had little impact on overall enjoyment once the game really opened up. Since that launch, though, Crimson Desert has had several large and significant patches. These patches have been received well generally across the board, with many gamers appreciating the changes and updates. The same is true for the media. Although their comments have been a little more critical, some giving the sense the game shouldn't have launched at all without these updates, or the game doesn't work without them. We've also seen sales continue at a rate perhaps a little unexpected after the initial reception, but what has been most impressive is the Steam concurrents, which were significantly higher a week after launch than at launch, and even 2 weeks later is right around the initial launch surge. While not entirely unheard of, this is rare, especially for a single-player game, and one that did not have strong reviews initially to build momentum over time. Where I think some are getting it wrong, though, is the idea that the patches themselves are making a significant difference in the success of the game. Again, they are generally improvements, and Perlibis is clearly willing to move quickly and decisively to improve the experience. But ironically, I believe that the players most impacted by the patches are those also least likely to actually believe the game is great or even all that good in the first place. I have no doubt that some players just couldn't get into the game without the patches and their quality of life updates. There are some real improvements, and especially when it comes to early combat and responsiveness, the patches are impactful. That said, if we look at the trajectory of the game's Steam numbers and the patch release dates, we can see that while the trend goes in the right direction, the timing doesn't quite line up. The story told in many articles is that by fixing problems with the game, problems identified in reviews, the overall impression and sales success have been resurgent. And I get where this impression comes from. For many who didn't click with the game, some of the early omissions were nearly unforgivable. Limited fast travel points, no base storage, and very challenging bosses were called out as real issues with the game, elements that were objectively negative and frankly difficult to look beyond. My take is different. I do believe for many gamers the changes were improvements. But I also believe that the people who found the early elements most frustrating also found the rest of the game less worthy of their time. I said those gamers couldn't look beyond what they considered fundamental flaws. But I believe what they saw when they tried was for them just as fundamentally uncompelling. While that might appear to be many in the media, the same is true for many gamers who couldn't find the experience enjoyable or worthwhile. Let's take a closer look at the concurrent timeline on Steam. The big surges in Steam player base do come after the patches, but not immediately. While this could just be some form of lag, I suspect something else is at work here, as if we take a step back and we took a closer look at the Steam reviews, we can see that they've been improving drastically from before the big patches, and that the trend doesn't change with the patches at all. Almost every strong impression of this game talks about how much the game improves over time, how the world opens up, how new experiences come along at a quick clip, and growing pains are forgotten as familiarity with the game improves. My view on this then is actually very simple. While the patches certainly may have helped, the resurgence was the natural progression of more players spending substantial time with the game, getting to the truly impressive parts of the game, and realizing how much of this impressive version there really was. More players sharing their impressions in person and online, and perhaps most importantly, the impressions being not only positive, but often reflecting a potentially frustrating but nearly transcendent experience. Reading about that kind of experience, hearing that kind of experience, seeing that kind of experience is what caused players to rush to buy the game, or to dive back in when their excitement may have waned. Many players had already had this exceptional experience before any of the post-launch patches were made. In fact, those in the media who did love the game loved it prior to even some of the major changes made during the review process. This would indicate clearly to me that the experience itself is the jewel in the crown here, and that the patch updates are merely detailing. The trend continues with more impressions being increasingly positive. The focus, as before the patches, is still on the scope of the world, the freedom, and the systems coming together over time to form a massively compelling recursive loop of enjoyment. The quality of life changes are relegated to mere details and are not at all the focus. Oddly enough, while I would wager this is a small component of the overall player base, some feel the changes have gone too far and make the game less enjoyable, not more enjoyable. What this means, though, is that while mileage may vary on the quality of life changes, the overall experience is still very much in line with the pre-patch design. I don't believe all these issues were just mistakes or oversights. I believe Pearl Abyss figured that fewer fast travel points would force the player to slow down and exist in the world, and that requiring some frustrating inventory management provided some positive friction through difficult choices. The players who find these things unreasonable are also likely to find the overall pace of the game unreasonable, the number of systems and time it takes to master them unreasonable. They may even find the sheer size of the game and freedom in combat unreasonable. I believe Pearl Abyss misjudged some design decisions, but I also suspect that those who find those mistakes almost inconceivable will have trouble conceiving any serious enjoyment in the game at all. Crimson Desert, for better or worse, is a game meant to overwhelm you, and in doing so, highlight possibilities no properly, reasonably constrained game could attempt. Difficult bosses are meant to make you engage with the combat systems more deeply and encourage experimentation. They're also meant to make you pause and look off in another direction and go wandering because of some curiosity in the distance. Lack of direction, even within game systems, is meant to evoke delight when the player figures out something that feels unplanned. Exhausting size and accompanying travel time is meant to place you in the world, make you slow down, make you focus on the journey and not the destination. That, however, and this may sound ridiculous, means the game isn't always fun. But that is by design. Delayed gratification can be powerful. Immersion can have more power than something we consider fun. And for those with patience in the face of frustration, it can pay dividends many times over. The idea here is that the slow start isn't just bad game design. It was, as I suggested in my previous video, the idea that the systems are so complex and numerous that there's no great way to introduce them reasonably. The game spends hours telling you the rules, giving you systems it doesn't fully elaborate on, and it's all way too much. Until it isn't, and things start to click. For some, this means the game has too many systems. There's too much going on, and that's bad game design. And I want to be clear that that's okay. That's reasonable. But for the right player, this is so very worth it. Dinga Bakaba, a former Dishonored developer, compares it to a board game, which is apt, but I consider it like sport. The first time you shoot a basketball, it feels like you have legs for arms. Being accurate at almost any distance feels impossible, even beneath the net. And doing that while working within deep and subjective rules, which your opponents are actively also trying to exploit at the same time, can seem like torture. Especially if you've watched an NBA game and expected to shoot like Steph Curry. Once everything comes together, there's still frustration. The ball goes in less than half the time. It requires a muscle memory only built by hundreds of hours of practice. And even if you get it all right, your opponent may just be bigger, faster, or taller, and you could still lose. And yet basketball, like any sport, can be one of the most enjoyable experiences in a person's life. The game I see people comparing to Crimson Desert, or perhaps the experience they find most similar, is that of Skyrim. And I find this matching up well with my experience with Skyrim. I suspect there are some, even many, who haven't gone back to play the recent Oblivion Remastered, or Skyrim even, to go test out a bunch of mods, find it old and rough, missing not just modern conveniences, but functional elements of modern game design. Many of those players will not enjoy Crimson Desert because those who miss those elements, those game design functionalities when playing the Elder Scroll titles, don't necessarily enjoy the point of those games. I don't like the idea of claiming they miss the point. I don't think they're confused. I think they understand. I just don't believe that game design works for them, at least in that time and place. For my own part, I didn't complete the story of Skyrim, and I can recall little about main characters or even the goal. I know it was there, I recall some cool reveals, but nothing stuck because it was a minuscule part of my experience, and not at all what drew me to the game or back in again and again and again. In my experience, I didn't really care about the narrative conceit when dragons attacked from the sky. I just wanted it to happen again. I didn't care where I could shout, I just wanted more shouts, although it was pretty cool that I had to climb the top of a mountain. What sticks with me more than anything the game ever showed me narratively, or within the primary quest line, was wandering off to find a cave with some kind of goblin-like creature that was nearly impossible to kill at my level. But once I did the impossible, it dropped a sword that made me feel overpowered for hours and hours. I remember spending days working through the blacksmithing systems, deriving more enjoyment from that than anything the story ever gave me. I recall hearing about werewolves and vampires outside of the game and going hunting for those experiences and mechanics without a quest marker or really much of anything at all in the way of direction. I played that game for hundreds and hundreds of hours, as have many, as the game has sold somewhere between 30 and 60 million copies, depending on who you ask. And I realize how big of a range that is. Just to recap though, the story was not compelling, the game was technically not very good and quite buggy, combat worked but was repetitive and stiff, magic didn't scale properly, stealth was basically an on or off switch, difficulty scaling was nonsense, and the economy, although expansive and full of opportunity and ambition, fell apart in the details almost immediately because of the freedom it gave you. The game had a bunch of systems, not all were well explained or all that functional, and yet it's one of the best-selling games of all time. There were many patches, fixes, updates, expansions, and special editions. But with all the updates, the game was still janky. The systems remained effectively the same, only adding more to the already unwieldy lot. But the core joy of what the game was brought people back again and again, had them buy it again and again, and still managed to bring in new players even now. In 2025, the Steam concurrents of the Skyrim Special Edition were 97% of the launch concurrents from 2016. it still hits 25,000 regularly today. I know Dragon Age Veilguard gets to be the punching bag around here, but it is worth considering the reasons why Skyrim, an old, always janky game with broken systems, can still pull in more players than Veilguard, a current RPG with a strong budget and every convenience the player could ask for. I don't want to get too deep into it because I don't think it's a horrible game, just not a Dragon Age game, and not very special. For Skyrim, there's something real in that kind of game design. Something that compels players almost indefinitely, even if it doesn't appear to vibe with many in the media today. Once again, while I want to remain even, as I do genuinely believe that everyone likes different things, and you certainly don't need to like Crimson Desert, I do feel the need to wade just a little into the muck. Crimson Desert appeals to me right now, and it suits my sensibilities. But a game like this can also feel like work, and I think we can all think of a time when an overwhelming game was not what we wanted. I can also imagine how a game like this just doesn't work well for a reviewer. There is a sense, I think, even when there is enough time, that there's a need to get through the game, to binge it and find everything, to explain the game. And in that scenario, this game would be confounding. That said, there is a response from a certain kind of player, and yes, sometimes that player is a member of the media, that seems to be more dismissive than critical. Certain articles aim criticisms at the game that don't reflect a personal view, but suggest everything from objectively bad game design to being directly responsible for the downfall of the industry. What stood out most to me, though, was perhaps how comfortable so many seemed to not only label this game outright bad, but had an out-of-place willingness to cast aspersions at the developer and their design philosophy, as well as explicitly negative evaluations of the kind of player who might enjoy that kind of game design. I'll be honest, I don't fully agree with many of the bold statements being made right now about these critics and their motives. It's not nearly so simple to me. But as usual, I find questions more interesting to start with than conclusions. What I will leave you with today is that if you've been paying attention, the strong critical dismissal doesn't sound at all like the impressions of those enjoying the game, even though they're both describing the same thing. Those enjoying it are diving deep into the game and finding an experience like almost no other. What's most important here, though, is that the experience didn't come from more fast travel points, lower boss hit points, or increased inventory. What is most impressive about the game has always been there, and the patches at best made it just a little easier to see for the right player. The transcendent experience comes not from quality of life, but from a game built on the idea of wonder and opportunity. One that throws enough at you that you can't process it all for a very long time, perhaps ever, because that evokes a feeling of pure freedom, even as it does frustration. And for the right player, there is nothing better. Once again, thank you for watching. I've been your harmless Canadian.